All right, so President Trump, yesterday, he went off on governors on a phone call saying, why the hell aren't you locking down your states and making sure that law-abiding citizens are able to actually roam your streets? Here's President Trump going off on governors correctly.
Get a lot of men. We have all the men and women that you need. But people aren't calling them up. You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate. And you have to arrest people, and you have to try people. And they have to go to jail for long periods of time. And those kids, they're all on camera. They're wise guys.
Okay, he is correct about this. The media were very angry. How dare he say this to the governors? Well, considering the governors have failed to prevent the destruction of law and order in their areas, considering that they have completely failed to do this, Trump is not wrong. Okay, so Trump yesterday, he does a presser in the Rose Garden. And at the same time the presser was going on, this is what became the major controversy of the day, of course. At the same time the presser was going on, the situation in Lafayette Square, which is right adjacent to the White House, there were a bunch of protesters there, and they were being cleared with apparently smoke grenades, essentially. They were being cleared from the area. Now, the media later declared that President Trump had done this in order to clear the area so that he could walk over to the local church at St. John's, which had nearly been burned down a couple of days ago for a photo op. And well, let's just be clear about this. According to U.S. Park Police, they say that tear gas was never used, smoke canisters were deployed, which don't have an uncomfortable irritant in them. This is according to Neil Augenstein over at WTOP. The source says Park Police didn't know Trump would be walking across the park several minutes later. Park Police say the reason the crowd was dispersed with smoke canisters is that at the moment, while officers were being pelted with water bottles, another factor was that protesters had climbed on top of the structure at the north end of Lafayette Square that had been burned the day before. That is Park Police's side of the story. So they're saying that basically there was indeed civil unrest, and that is why they were clearing the park. In any case, as that was going on, President Trump spoke in the Rose Garden. Here was President Trump saying that we are going to ensure that justice is served for George Floyd. By the way, there's an FBI investigation going on. The DOJ is on this particular case. Trump has been very consistent in suggesting that he was horrified by the tape. So here's Trump saying that, yeah, we're going to do our best to find out what happened with George Floyd, and then people will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
All Americans were rightly sickened and revolted by the brutal death of George Floyd. My administration is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain. But we cannot allow the righteous cries and peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob.
He is exactly correct about this. And then he says, listen, we're going to end the riots and the lawlessness. This is not going to continue. Here's the president yesterday in the Rose Garden on the split screen with all of the protests and riots going on around the country.
I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans, including your Second Amendment rights. Therefore, the following measures are going into effect immediately. First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now.
Okay, and then he said, listen, if the mayors don't do it, I'm going to dispatch the military to do it. So I'm just going to note here, the same media who are very angry at Trump for not issuing a nationwide lockdown order over COVID-19 are now saying that he's a tyrant for saying that if he has to, he will activate the military, and he does have the legal authority to do this. He will activate the military in order to stop rioting and looting. So is it possible that the media just hate Trump? I sort of get that feeling. Here's President Trump yesterday.
A number of state and local governments have failed to take necessary action to safeguard their residents. Innocent people have been savagely beaten, like the young man in Dallas, Texas, who was left dying on the street, or the woman in upstate New York viciously attacked by dangerous thugs. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
Okay, so this was horrible, according to Democrats and according to the media. This is tyranny. And as we'll see, the media reaction here is extraordinary and over the top and crazy. He does have the legal authority to do this under the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act has, in fact, been invoked before. It was invoked in 1992 during the Los Angeles riots. Now, in that case, the governor, who was then Pete Wilson, a Republican in California, asked the federal government to invoke the Insurrection Act so that the federal government could send in troops and quell the rioting that was happening in South Central Los Angeles. Okay, but you don't actually need state permission in order to do that, or a state request in order to do that. In fact, the Insurrection Act was invoked over the objections of Governor Orville Faubus in Alabama in order to ensure that black kids could go to school in the 1950s at integrated schools. President Eisenhower invoked the Insurrection Act. Okay, so the Insurrection Act is generally invoked when local authorities are not doing their jobs in protecting the civil rights of their citizens. So the president does have the authority to do this sort of stuff. So the president has real authority to do it. And the president, by the way, didn't say he's going to do it. He said, if you don't get your cities and states under control, then I will do it. And guess what? He should. He should. Because you're an American tax-paying citizen. You have civil rights. Your civil rights are being abridged and violated when you are locked in your home so rioters and looters can roam free. If the president has to do this, and he shouldn't have to. I mean, the fact is that mayors and governors who fail should be held politically accountable for their failures. But does the president have the legal authority to do this? He does. He does have the legal authority to do this. And he was not guaranteeing he is going to. He was saying, if you continue to let this stuff rage out of control, then I will have to. But guess what? Many states are starting to get this under control. Minnesota is where this started, and the unrest has basically died down over the last 3 days. Why? Because there are now heavy boots on the ground from police. After the governor, Tim Walz, basically activated the National Guard and told the Minneapolis mayor to stop with his nonsense and allow the police to do their jobs, it turns out that rioting and looting were basically stamped out. Okay, so this was controversy number one regarding President Trump. There was controversy number two regarding President Trump, and that was the situation right after this. So President Trump speaks at the Rose Garden. As he is speaking, the police are firing tear gas at protesters in Lafayette Square. So the original story is that they were doing this in order to clear the path so that President Trump could go do a photo op at St. John's. And the video is disturbing because you see the police who are advancing on a crowd of people who seem to mostly just be protesting. Like, you don't see anybody who is committing acts of violence in this particular video. And the police are dispersing smoke grenades in order to move people out of Lafayette Square. People are saying, these are peaceful protesters. Why are you dispersing them? Why are you telling them to leave? Well, okay, this is about 25 minutes before the mandatory curfew in the city. Okay, but beyond that, it is also a fact of the matter that you do not necessarily, like, typically if you're going to have a protest, I mean, just to be perfectly legally technical about this, I'm not a huge fan of clearing people who are protesting in public parks, just generally. Not a huge fan of that. However, if you've ever held a protest, one thing you know is that you actually have to have licensing from the police. You're supposed to be licensed with the local authorities. Presumably, that's not what happened here. And so the police moved them out. According to the park police, again, I'm just quoting the park police. According to the park police, these people were moved out because people were chucking water bottles at the cops, and they were positioning themselves on top of burned out monuments and all the rest. Okay, so that's the situation. Then President Trump walks out, and he decides to walk to the church. We'll get to that in just one second, because this became the sort of flashpoint. Of course, the implication was that Trump had ordered the clearing out of the park in order so that he could do the sort of macho pose in front of the church. First of all, if you are deeply troubled by the president going, and if you are more troubled by the president going and posing in front of a burned out church and vowing law and order than you are by the fact that people burned the church in the first place, then you are doing this wrong. You are doing this wrong. Whatever your feelings about the photo op nature of this sort of thing, the fact of the matter is that if you are more disturbed about President Trump photo opping in front of a burned out church than you are about the fact that a cop was run over last night in Buffalo, or the fact that cops were being shot in St. Louis, or the fact that stores were being looted around New York, or the fact that the church itself was burned like 2 days ago, then it's because you hate Trump. Truthfully. You can be outraged at both, but you really cannot say that this is what's breaking the country. I'm sorry, Trump clearing a park, even if that's what happened, and the park police say it isn't, but even if that's what happened, Trump clearing a park to stand in front of a church is not it is not fascist, it is not tyranny, it is not Tiananmen Square, it is not on the order of anything else that is going on that is an actual threat to the lives and rights of American citizens. Did you know that every like on this video creates one additional leftist tier? Don't ask me why, that's called science. To take advantage of this amazing opportunity, hit the like button.